Cadden Voss never liked sand, or planets that pretended sand was their only commodity. Jarkali was an endless rolling hellscape of the stuff, stretching out like the universe's most boring desert-themed wallpaper. "At least you won't get sunburned," his partner Rix had quipped. Cadden's reply had been a dull stare. Sunburn wasn't his problem, it was sand in places sand wasn't meant to be. Cadden squatted beside what passed for a road in Jarkali's capital, if a scatter of adobe huts could be called a capital. The ruins loomed a little ways off, jagged teeth of stone sticking out of the ground, the remnant of some ancient civilization's bad dental plan. "See that energy reading?" Rix thrust a scanner under Cadden's nose, the device blinking with enthusiasm Cadden couldn't muster. "Oh goody, more things we don't understand," Cadden muttered. "What's it say? Proceed with caution, do not eat." "It says," Rix continued unfazed, "that this energy signature is off the charts. Could be something big, real big. Big like last week's chilly incident big, or big like we're gonna redefine existence big. Somewhere between getting fired and starting a new religion." Cadden grunted. "That's a wide gap, you know. Welcome to science." The council meeting was a circus. Not the fun kind with lions and clowns, more like the kind where everyone's a clown and there's nothing but politics and egos roaring around. The Galactic Council, supposedly a beacon of unity, looked more like a dysfunctional family reunion. Not that Cadden had much experience with those, but he'd seen enough holovids. Inside the council chamber, representatives from every corner of the galaxy sat in a half-circle. The center stage was a giant hologram of the Jarkali ruins, spinning slowly. Each species had its quirks, some tall and willowy, others squat and bristly, each looking more uncomfortable than the last. Except for the humans, they were in their element, sitting, watching, and judging. Counselor Vera, a spindly creature resembling a cross between a spider and a diplomat, opened the meeting. "We gather here to discuss the implications of the energy readings detected on Jarkali." Her voice was like a rusty hinge, creaking and grating. "Implications? More like who gets the biggest piece of the pie," Cadden whispered to Rix, who smirked behind his hand. "Initial analysis suggests the energy could bridge universes," Vera continued. "Or blow them up. Flip a coin," Cadden added. Vera shot him a look but didn't lose her stride. "This could advance our understanding of the multiverse exponentially." Another representative, a hulking creature with skin like molten rock, rumbled. "And if it goes wrong?" "Then we all get a new definition of wrong," Cadden said, drawing more stares. "Look, we're talking about poking a hole in the universe. Anyone else feel like a hamster playing with a loaded gun? Your species does have a knack for chaos," the molten representative replied, with a tone suggesting he wasn't entirely joking. "And what a knack it is," Rix chimed in. "Remember when we invented the internet? Never heard of it." "Exactly." The counselors bickered, each trying to outdo the other in displays of concern, wisdom, and general self-importance. Cadden stopped listening after the third mention of potential ramifications. Winning a race to nowhere, he thought. Then Vera announced, "We need a team to explore the ruins further. Volunteers." Silence. The kind of silence that happens when someone asks who wants to clean up a spaceport restroom. "Oh, come on. It's not like we're asking you to juggle plasma grenades," Cadden said, standing up. "We'll do it." Rix looked at him with a mix of admiration and the exasperation of someone who knows their friend's an idiot but an entertaining one at that. "Because why not? Humans love a good thrill," Rix sighed. Vera seemed relieved. "Thank you, Cadden Voss and your team." As they left the council chamber, Rix punched Cadden's shoulder. "You do know we could die horribly, right?" "That's where the thrill comes in," Cadden replied. "Besides, we might just learn something." "Like what? How to die creatively?" Cadden grinned. "Maybe how not to." The ruins were no less imposing up close. They loomed like the universe's ugliest jigsaw puzzle, scattered pieces of stone and metal jutting out at odd angles. The energy buzzed around them, a faint hum that tickled the air and made the hairs on Cadden's neck stand up like they were auditioning for a horror holo. "All right, team, let's not touch anything shiny," Cadden instructed, pulling on gloves that he hoped were more than just decorative. Rix rolled his eyes. Because that's ever stopped us before. They moved cautiously through the ruins, the ground crunching underfoot like the broken dreams of a million civilizations. Cadden tried not to think too hard about what might have happened to those who built this place. Probably something involving a spectacularly bad day. "The readings are stronger over here," Rick said, consulting his scanner like it was a crystal ball. "If this thing had a heart, this would be it. Let's hope it doesn't have a pulse," Cadden muttered, peering into a chamber that opened up in front of them. The walls were etched with symbols, the kind that looked like they should mean something profound but probably just meant keep out or don't touch. Rick scanned the symbols. "Yeah, this is definitely a do not touch sign." Cadden edged closer, peering into the dark. "You ever get the feeling we're gonna regret this?" "Constantly," Rix replied. "But then I regret most things." Suddenly the ground trembled, a low rumble that vibrated up through their feet and rattled their bones. "Oh look, we touched something," Rix pointed out unnecessarily. "That wasn't us," Cadden said, watching as the walls began to glow, an eerie, sickly light that spilled across the chamber. "Well, it's been nice knowing ya," Rix said, backing away slowly. "We're not dead yet," Cadden replied, though his voice lacked conviction. The light grew brighter, bathing everything in a harsh, unnatural glow. "You know," Cadden said as they slowly retreated, "I always thought it'd go out with more of a bang, or maybe less of a light show." "I pictured something involving pizza," Rix agreed. Then just as suddenly as it started, the light flickered and died, leaving them in darkness, their hearts pounding louder than they cared to admit. "That was expected," Cadden muttered, trying to sound nonchalant and failing miserably. "Let's not do that again," Rick said, shaking his head. "Think we should call for backup and tell them what? Hey, we found a really nice light switch." "Good point," Rix conceded. "So, what's next, fearless leader? We keep poking around," Cadden said, hoping he sounded more confident than he felt. "And hope the universe doesn't poke back too hard." As they ventured deeper into the ruins, the air grew colder, the sense of ancient power more palpable. Cadden couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, like the ruins themselves had eyes judging them. "You think there's anything left alive in here?" Rix asked. "Define alive." "Not us," Rix clarified. "Then probably," Cadden replied. "Let's just hope it's friendly." They turned a corner and froze. In the center of the chamber, a massive stone monolith rose from the floor, covered in the same cryptic symbols. The air around it shimmered, distorted, like heat waves on a blistering day. "That's not ominous at all," Rick said, eyeing the monolith with suspicion. Cadden walked forward, his curiosity getting the better of him. "Looks like the epicenter," he mused, reaching out cautiously. Rix grabbed his arm. "You sure?" "Nope. But we came this far," Cadden replied, shrugging off Rix's grip. He touched the monolith, half expecting it to explode or send them hurtling into another dimension. Instead, it hummed under his hand, a deep resonance that vibrated through his body. The air thickened, a sense of presence growing stronger. "You know," Cadden said softly, "I think we might actually be onto something." "Or something's onto us," Rix countered, glancing nervously at the shadows. Suddenly, the monolith flared to life, light cascading over its surface like water, symbols glowing with renewed intensity. Cadden," Rix said, backing up, "I think we've overstayed our welcome." Cadden couldn't tear his eyes away. "I think we just found our multiverse bridge," he whispered, all mingled with terror. As the monolith pulsed with energy, the air crackling with potential, Cadden realized they stood on the brink of something monumental. The council's bickering seemed insignificant now, mere background noise to the symphony of possibilities unfolding before them. "Cadden," Rick said urgently, "we need to get out of here. Now." Cadden nodded slowly, stepping back, his mind racing. They had to warn the others, to figure out what this meant for humanity, for everyone. And yet, as they retreated, one thought nagged at the back of his mind. What had they unleashed? With the ruins rumbling behind them and the weight of discovery heavy on their shoulders, Cadden and Rick sprinted back towards their ship, the vast desert stretching out before them. Cadden glanced back one last time at the looming monolith, a silent promise of power and peril. "This isn't over," he muttered to himself, knowing full well that whatever came next, it would test them all. The council chamber buzzed with a symphony of disgruntled voices that could have doubled as a soundtrack for a particularly chaotic holovid. Cadden stood in the back, arms crossed, trying to ignore the sand that had somehow found its way into his boots. Rix leaned against the wall next to him, eyes flicking between the counselors as they flung accusations like monkeys in a zoo. "The ruins clearly fall under our jurisdiction," a thin, blue-skinned counselor declared, her voice like a chisel scraping against a metal plate. Her species name escaped Cadden, something with too many vowels and not enough consonants. "Oh, sure," Cadden muttered to Rix, "because blue people clearly have dibs on ancient sand traps. Typical argument," Rix replied with a smirk. "Let's slap a flag on it and call it a day." The molten-skinned representative from earlier, now identified as Zorvek, slammed a fist onto the table, leaving a small scorch mark. "The energy readings indicate a power source that could stabilize our sun. We should have control, and if you blow up the galaxy in the process," Cadden interjected, unable to keep his mouth shut, "we're all out of galaxies. Limited stock, you know." Vera, trying to keep the peace with all the effectiveness of a damp rag in a wildfire, raised her many hands. "We must decide together. This discovery could benefit everyone, or kill everyone," Rix added helpfully, earning a few icy glares. Cadden rolled his eyes. "How about we all agree to not turn the universe into a giant barbecue?" The arguing continued, various factions laying claim, each more self-righteous than the last. The humans, however, had a different angle. It wasn't about claiming the ruins, it was about understanding them. Cadden couldn't help but feel a twinge of pride. Humans didn't always want to break things. Sometimes they wanted to know why they should. "We propose a collective research effort," stated the human representative, an unassuming woman named Shaw. She had the kind of voice that was both soothing and authoritative. "The potential here is immense, but only if we don't act like children fighting over toys." Cadden stifled a laugh. "That's 90% of galactic politics right there," he whispered to Rix. Rix nodded. "And the other 10%, pretending we're adults." The counselors haggled over details, like a pack of wolves fighting over the last scrap of meat. Each species wanted to be the hero of their own story, even if they had to rewrite history to do it. As the debate droned on, Cadden's thoughts drifted back to the ruins and that monolith, now etched into his mind like a bad tattoo. He had a hunch there was more to it, something that everyone was missing while they squabbled over ownership. "Thinking what I'm thinking?" Rix asked, eyebrow raised. "That we're surrounded by idiots," Cadden replied. "Well, that and maybe there's more to those ruins." Rix tapped his scanner, the device flickering to life with a soft hum. "Think we should pay another visit, why not?" Cadden grinned. "It's not like these meetings accomplish anything." They slipped out of the chamber, unnoticed by the feuding counselors. The hallways of the council building were a maze of sterile corridors, each as forgettable as the last. But it wasn't long before they found themselves back in the glaring sunlight of Jarkali. The desert stretched out ahead, a never-ending expanse of sand and regret. "Ah, sand," Cadden said, kicking at the gritty ground. "The gift that keeps on giving. More like the punishment that keeps on punishing," Rix quipped. Their trek back to the ruins was silent, save for the crunch of sand underfoot and the occasional gust of wind that threatened to sandblast them to bone. By the time they reached the site, Cadden's patience was wearing thinner than his shoes. Back inside, the ruins were as unwelcoming as before, shadows clinging to every surface like unwanted party guests. Cadden led the way, guided more by instinct than memory, until they reached the monolith chamber. "All right, let's see what secrets you're hiding," Cadden muttered, approaching the ominous stone structure. He placed his hand on its surface, half expecting it to activate again. Rix joined him, scanning the surrounding walls. "There's definitely something here," he said, frowning at the readings. "Energy signatures are off the charts." Cadden circled the monolith, his eyes scanning for any sign of a mechanism or hidden switch, anything that might reveal the chamber's purpose. but it was all just stone and more stone. His frustration mounted, along with a nagging sense that he was missing something blindingly obvious. Maybe if we, Rick started, but the ground had different ideas. The floor gave way beneath them without warning, a trapdoor cleverly hidden by layers of dust and neglect. Cadden yelped as they plummeted into darkness, the fall rudely interrupted by the hard embrace of a stone floor. Well, that was unexpected, Cadden groaned, rubbing his bruised back. Unexpected and painful, Rix agreed, wincing as he stood. He flicked on his flashlight, revealing another chamber, this one smaller and more intimate than the others. The walls were lined with intricate carvings, depictions of figures that looked unnervingly human. They stood proud and defiant, arms raised as if challenging the universe itself. Symbols glowed faintly in the dim light, casting eerie shadows that danced like ghosts. "This is new," Rick said, awe creeping into his voice. "Or old," Cadden replied, studying the carvings. They seemed to speak to him, whispering of potential and power, of humanity's role in an unfathomably vast cosmos. "There's something about this place." Rick's scanner lit up with a frenzy of activity. "Whatever this is, it's reacting to us." "Or you specifically." Cadden looked at the carvings again, his breath catching as realization dawned. "I think this place was meant for us, Rix, for humans. Why would an alien ruin be meant for humans?" Rix asked, skeptical but intrigued. "Why does anything in this universe make sense?" Cadden countered. "But look at these figures. They're human or close enough. Maybe this chamber was hidden for a reason. Maybe it's about unlocking something." Rix shook his head, scanning the carvings again. "Crazy as it sounds, you might be right. But what does it mean?" Cadden didn't have an answer, just a gut feeling that they were on the brink of something monumental. The council, with all its bickering and bureaucracy, was focused on the power of the ruins. But this chamber, this hidden place, it was about something else entirely. "Maybe it's about what we could become," Cadden said softly, his voice barely more than a whisper. "About tapping into potential we didn't know we had." Rix looked at him, a spark of excitement mingling with caution. "You think we can do it?" "I think we have to try," Cadden replied. "And maybe, just maybe, we'll learn something that changes everything." They stood there for a moment, two lone figures in a forgotten corner of the galaxy, contemplating the weight of their discovery. Whatever lay ahead, Cadden knew it wouldn't be easy. But then nothing worth doing ever was. "Let's get back to the ship," Rix suggested, breaking the silence. "We need to figure out how to present this without getting laughed out of the chamber." Cadden nodded, a determined gleam in his eye. "And maybe find a way to keep it out of the wrong hands." As they made their way back through the ruins, the enormity of their discovery settling in, Cadden couldn't help but feel a strange sense of hope. It was fleeting, like a mirage on the horizon, but it was there. And in a universe filled with darkness and uncertainty, a little hope went a long way. The council might be fractured and the future uncertain, but Cadden knew one thing for sure. Whatever happened next, humanity would face it head-on, with all the stubbornness and ingenuity that defined them. And if the universe didn't like it, well, that was too damn bad. Cadden and Rick stumbled back into the council chamber like two kids caught sneaking out of detention, only to find the chaotic debate had somehow reached new levels of absurdity. The sound of heated discussions hit them like a wall of noise, the clamor echoing off the chamber's high ceilings. "Ah, the sweet symphony of political incompetence," Cadden quipped, earning a dry chuckle from Rix. Shaw, the human representative, caught sight of them and waved them over. She wore an expression that suggested she'd been trying to herd cats all morning and was now on the verge of giving up. "Back so soon?" she asked, with a hint of surprise. "Well, we figured we'd take a break from nearly dying in ancient death traps to enjoy the subtle art of verbal warfare," Cadden replied, attempting a smile. "Good timing," Shaw said, her voice low. "They've reached the phase where shouting louder is mistaken for having valid points. I thought that was phase 1, Rix muttered, scanning the room. Cadden cleared his throat, stepping forward with a confidence that belied the butterflies somersaulting in his stomach. It was time to share their discovery, though he had the sinking feeling he'd be lucky if they didn't all throw shoes at him. "If I could have everyone's attention," he said, raising his voice above the din. Predictably, he was ignored. Shaw came to his rescue, clapping her hands together sharply. "Quiet down, everyone. Let's hear what the humans have to say." The room grudgingly settled, and dozens of skeptical eyes turned toward Cadden. He could practically taste the doubt in the air, and it was bitter. "We found a chamber beneath the ruins," he began, skipping the preamble and going straight for the gut punch. "It's filled with carvings, symbols that seem to depict humans, and energy readings that are off the charts." Zorvac, the molten-skinned representative, let out a derisive snort. "More human-centric fantasies." "This isn't a nursery tale, human. Wouldn't dream of it," Cadden shot back. "But these carvings, they're not just random etchings. There's something significant there, something meant for us." A rustle of disbelief swept through the room, accompanied by murmurs of doubt. Cadden took a deep breath, trying to remain unfazed. Vera raised her many hands, seeking calm but achieving chaos. "What proof do you have? This could be a coincidence." "I've got Rix's scanner readings," Cadden replied, gesturing to his partner. "The energy signatures in that chamber match something we've never encountered before. Energy signatures that could be dangerous," Zorvac pointed out, eyes narrowing. "Perhaps this is all a ploy for humans to gain control. Or maybe it's a chance for us to learn something if we don't let paranoia get in the way," Shaw interjected, her tone firm. "Right," Cadden added, seizing the opportunity. "This isn't just about power. It's about potential. We could unlock something that benefits everyone if we work together instead of constantly pointing fingers." "Optimism from a human," said the blue-skinned counselor, her tone heavy with sarcasm. "That's new. Figured we'd try it out," Rix said. "Why not? Doesn't seem like anyone else is using it." As the counselors resumed their bickering, voices rising once more, Cadden felt a familiar pang of frustration. The ruins held secrets, but getting the council to see beyond their own agendas was like asking a black hole to lighten up. Then, the sound of howling winds reached his ears. At first, he thought it was just the breeze picking up. But when the walls of the chamber began to tremble and the windows rattled like the teeth of a freezing man, it became clear something far more ominous was happening. "Well, that's not good," Rix muttered, peering out a window. Cadden joined him, squinting against the glare of the desert sun. A massive sandstorm was rolling in, an undulating wall of grit and fury that blotted out the horizon. It was as if the planet itself had decided to join the argument, and its contribution was anything but subtle. "Looks like nature's not a fan of bureaucracy either," Cadden quipped, watching the storm with a mix of awe and dread. "Everyone, we need to evacuate." Shaw called out, her voice cutting through the rising panic. "Find shelter in the inner chambers." The counselors scrambled, each more concerned with self-preservation than maintaining any semblance of order. It was chaos, pure and simple, a microcosm of galactic politics in action. "This is bad," Rix said, stating the obvious as they hurried toward the interior of the building. "Yeah, but at least it's not boring," Cadden replied, ducking a flying chair knocked loose in the frenzy. They reached the relative safety of an inner chamber just as the storm hit, the world outside swallowed by a maelstrom of sand. The noise was deafening, a roar that drowned out all other sound and left them in a cocoon of dusty silence. For a moment, there was nothing to do but wait, the storm raging outside like a wild beast denied its prey. The counselors huddled together, their earlier arguments forgotten in the face of a common threat. It was almost heartwarming, in a bleak, cynical sort of way. "Think this is the universe telling us to stop being idiots and work together?" Rix asked, half serious. "Probably," Cadden said. "But then, when have we ever listened?" The storm raged on, minutes stretching into an eternity before finally, mercifully, it began to abate. When the winds died down, the room was filled with a collective sigh of relief. "Is it over?" someone asked timidly. "Looks like it," Cadden said, peering cautiously out a window. The landscape outside was unrecognizable, dunes shifted by the storm, new contours carved into the planet's surface. The storm had exposed more of the ruins, half-buried structures now thrust into the open like skeletons unearthed by a determined grave robber. "Well, would you look at that?" Rick said, a spark of excitement in his voice. "Looks like the storm did us a favor. Guess it's time for some unplanned archaeology," Cadden replied, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. They had a chance now, a real chance to uncover the mysteries of Jarkali if they could just get the council to see beyond their own noses. "Let's get out there before the council repopulates with more hot air," Rick suggested. The two of them, along with Shaw and a few begrudging counselors, ventured out into the transformed landscape. The storm's aftermath was a surreal tapestry of shadows and light, the exposed ruins casting long, jagged silhouettes across the sand. "Look at this," Cadden said, pointing to a newly revealed structure, its surface covered in the same intricate carvings as the chamber below. "This is bigger than your last bright idea," Rick teased, though his eyes gleamed with curiosity. "Hopefully with fewer accidental death traps," Cadden shot back. "But yeah, I think so." The counselors gathered around the site, their earlier skepticism momentarily forgotten in the face of new discoveries. Even Zorvek seemed intrigued, though he kept his distance, eyes narrowed with suspicion. "This changes things," Shaw said, her gaze fixed on the ruins. "Only if we let it," Cadden replied. "We've got a chance here to make this work, to learn something that could actually help us. Or we can keep arguing until the ruins collapse from sheer frustration." The counselors exchanged glances, uncertainty warring with curiosity. Cadden could see the wheels turning, the possibility that maybe, just maybe, they could set aside their differences long enough to seize the moment. "All right," said Vera, her many hands folded in a gesture of tentative agreement. "We'll allow a joint exploration team, but under strict supervision." Cadden grinned, feeling the first stirrings of genuine hope. "That's all we ask. Let's see where this rabbit hole leads." With the council's grudging cooperation secured, they set about exploring the exposed sections of the ruins. Cadden and Rix took the lead, their excitement tempered by caution as they navigated the alien architecture. The carvings told a story, a narrative of discovery and ambition, of a civilization reaching beyond the stars. But there were warnings too, subtle signs of hubris and the dangers of reaching too far too fast. "It's like a cosmic cautionary tale," Rix observed, tracing a finger over the stone surface. "Wonder if they listened." "Doubt it," Cadden said, scanning the intricate designs. "But maybe we don't have to make the same mistakes." The deeper they delved, the more apparent it became that this was no ordinary ruin. There was a logic to the layout, a sense of purpose that suggested something far more complex than mere architecture. It was a puzzle, and they were only just beginning to understand the pieces. As they worked, the counselors watched with a mix of skepticism and intrigue. Cadden could feel their eyes on him, the weight of their expectations and doubts a constant presence. "Think they'll come around?" Rix asked, not bothering to lower his voice. "Doubt it," Cadden said with a shrug. "But if we can show them there's more here than just power, maybe they'll at least stop treating us like the universe's biggest nuisances." "Speak for yourself," Rix replied with a grin. "I take pride in being a nuisance." The day wore on, the sun sinking low on the horizon, casting the ruins in a warm, golden light. It was beautiful in its own stark way, a reminder that even in a universe as vast and uncaring as this one, there were moments of unexpected grace. As they packed up their equipment, Cadden felt the weight of the day's discoveries settling in. There was still so much to learn, so many questions left unanswered. But for the first time he felt like they were on the right path, that maybe they'd stumbled onto something that could change everything. "Ready for round 2 tomorrow?" Rix asked as they made their way back to the council building, the ruins now a silhouette against the darkening sky. "Absolutely," Cadden replied, his mind already racing with possibilities. "And who knows? Maybe tomorrow we'll even manage to get through a meeting without shouting." "Now that's ambitious," Rick said, clapping him on the shoulder. As they walked, Cadden couldn't help but feel a flicker of something unfamiliar and unsettling. Hope. It was fragile and uncertain, like a single candle in a galaxy of darkness. But it was there, and for now, that was enough. Cadden and Rick stood at the fringes of the newly uncovered ruins, the remnants of the sandstorm still whispering through the cracks and crevices like a half-forgotten nightmare. The structures, now free of their sandy shrouds, loomed over them, ancient, enigmatic, and unsettlingly intact. It was the kind of place that stank of history and hubris, the perfect combination for a cosmic mess. "Looks like we've hit the jackpot of alien bad decisions," Rix muttered, flipping open his scanner. The device hummed to life, its screen flickering with readings that would make a physicist's heart skip a beat or stop cold, depending on their disposition. Cadden squinted at the shifting symbols, trying to make sense of the chaos. "I hope that thing's fluent in ancient alien," he said, nodding at the scanner. "Or do we need to hire a translator with a death wish?" Rick smirked. "It's a bit rusty on the dialect, but it seems to think there's something familiar in the tech. Could be a weapon, could be a toaster. Knowing our luck, it's both." Shaw joined them, her demeanor a blend of authority and thinly veiled exasperation. "What have you found?" she asked, casting a wary glance at the ruins. Her tone suggested she wasn't entirely sure she wanted to know. "Just the usual," Cadden replied with a shrug. "Possibly universe-altering technology left behind by a species that probably blew themselves to bits figuring out it was a bad idea." "Great," Shaw groaned. "Let's make sure we don't follow in their footsteps, huh?" "That would be a refreshing change of pace," Rix quipped, tapping the scanner. "I'm picking up some energy signatures deeper inside. Might be worth a look. Or it might be worth running like hell," Cadden said. "But since we're already here..." Together, they ventured into the depths of the ruins, the air around them growing cooler and more oppressive with each step. It was like descending into the belly of an ancient beast, one that had swallowed untold secrets and still had room for dessert. The chamber they entered was vast, its ceiling disappearing into shadows that danced with the flickering glow of their flashlights. In the center stood a monolithic device, covered in alien glyphs that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. "Well, there's something you don't see every day," Cadden remarked, eyeing the contraption. "Unless you hang out on planets with a penchant for bad ideas," Rix added. Shaw stepped closer, her gaze fixed on the device. "Think it still works?" "Only one way to find out," Cadden said, reaching for a panel covered in indecipherable symbols. His fingers hovered over the surface, the air buzzing with the potential for both discovery and disaster. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" Shaw asked, her voice tinged with concern. "Nope," Cadden replied, pressing his hand to the panel. The device came to life with an ominous hum, lights flickering along its surface as if awakening from a long slumber. A series of holographic images burst forth, hanging in the air like spectral visions. They shifted and changed, each one depicting a different version of the universe, a tapestry of possibilities both wondrous and terrifying. "Well, that's something," Rick said, staring at the images with wide eyes. "Something that's likely to give the Council a collective aneurysm," Cadden observed. As if on cue, the counselors arrived, drawn by the sudden burst of activity. Zorvek eyed the device with a mixture of intrigue and suspicion, his molten skin glistening in the holographic light. "What have you done?" he demanded, his voice a low growl. "Just a bit of light tinkering," Cadden replied with a shrug. "Turns out this thing's a doorway to a multiverse of fun and existential dread." Vera, ever the peacemaker, clapped her many hands in an attempt to calm the growing tension. "Perhaps this is an opportunity," she suggested. "We could learn much from these visions. Or we could unleash horrors beyond our comprehension," Zorvek countered, crossing his arms. "Isn't that what you're all here for?" Rix quipped. "To find out if the universe hates us as much as we hate each other," the counselors muttered among themselves, their earlier unity in the face of the storm now fracturing under the weight of new uncertainties. "Let's not jump to conclusions," Shaw said, stepping forward. "We need to study this carefully, understand what we're dealing with." Cadden nodded, his gaze fixed on the swirling holograms. If these visions are anything to go by, we've got a lot to unpack, and probably not enough bubble wrap. The images shifted again, showing a universe where suns exploded in a cataclysmic chain reaction, wiping out entire star systems. Another depicted a cosmos thriving with life, its inhabitants reaching out to one another in a spirit of cooperation that seemed almost laughably idealistic. "Think that one's a comedy?" Rix asked, pointing at the utopian vision. "Probably a tragedy in disguise," Cadden replied. "I'd put my money on the exploding suns." The counselors continued to argue, their voices a cacophony of fear, skepticism, and greed, each convinced they knew the best way forward, none willing to cede ground. "Enough," Shaw said, raising her voice above the din. "We need to approach this rationally." "There's too much at stake." "Rationality?" Zorvek scoffed. "From a human? Hey, sometimes we surprise even ourselves," Cadden shot back. Maybe this is one of those times. Despite the tension, there was an undeniable pull to the visions, a promise of knowledge and power that was as seductive as it was terrifying. The counselors, for all their bickering, couldn't tear their eyes away from the possibilities unfolding before them. "Let's conduct a thorough examination," Vera proposed. "Determine the safest course of action." "Safe," Rix laughed. "Where's the fun in that?" Cadden shook his head, a wry grin on his lips. "Guess we're in for a ride, then." As the counselors reluctantly agreed to a more measured approach, the chamber buzzed with an energy that was both hopeful and foreboding. They were on the brink of something monumental, a doorway to a multitude of futures. "Think we'll make it out of this one in one piece?" Rix asked as they began setting up equipment to study the device. "Not a chance," Cadden replied, "but we'll give it a hell of a try." With the council's grudging cooperation, Cadden and his team set about deciphering the device, their minds racing with possibilities. It was slow, painstaking work, each new revelation as likely to inspire awe as it was to prompt existential dread. "These visions," Shaw said, gesturing to the swirling images. "They could be a warning or a guide, or both," Cadden suggested. "A cosmic choose-your-own-adventure. Just hope we don't pick the one where everyone dies." Rix leaned over, his eyes fixed on a particular image, a universe teetering on the brink of annihilation, its stars flickering like dying embers. "Looks like someone's been playing fast and loose with the laws of physics." "Yeah, well, we all have our hobbies," Cadden said. "Some people build ships, others tinker with the fabric of reality." As the hours ticked by, the counselors grew restless, their earlier unity dissolving into petty squabbles and grandstanding. It was like watching a soap opera, only with higher stakes and worse acting. "Think they'll ever agree on anything?" Rix asked, watching the counselors with a bemused expression. "Not a chance," Cadden replied. "But if we can keep them from blowing everything up for just a little while longer, I'll call it a win." The device continued to churn out visions, each more unsettling than the last, a stark reminder of the precariousness of their situation. They were dancing on the edge of a precipice, one wrong step away from falling into chaos. "Maybe we should call it a day," Shaw suggested, her voice tinged with weariness. "Approach this with fresh eyes tomorrow." Cadden nodded, though his mind was still racing. "Probably a good idea. We've got enough material for a lifetime of nightmares." As they packed up their equipment, the counselors dispersed, their arguments trailing off into the shadows. Despite the tension, there was a sense of shared purpose, a fragile hope that they might yet find a way through the darkness. "Think we'll figure this out?" Rix asked as they made their way back to the surface. "Maybe," Cadden replied, casting one last glance at the ruins. "Or maybe we'll just make a bigger mess." Rix chuckled, clapping him on the shoulder. "Either way, it's bound to be interesting." As they stepped out into the night, the stars above a vast sea of possibility, Cadden felt a flicker of something deep within, a spark of hope, tempered by the knowledge that in a universe as chaotic as theirs, nothing was ever certain. But if there was one thing he knew for sure, it was that they wouldn't go down without a fight. Cadden Voss had just managed to convince his scanner that the sweat on his brow wasn't a sign of malfunction when the council meeting descended into chaos. Again, the chamber, lofty enough to house the egos within, echoed with the sound of accusations flying like space debris in a meteor shower. Typical humans, always meddling, Zorvek growled, his molten skin casting an ominous glow that matched his mood. You activate an ancient device and expect us to believe it was an accident. Cadden rubbed his temples, wishing he'd brought earplugs or a good alibi. Yeah, because I totally planned on opening a cosmic Pandora's box just to see what happens. Next on my bucket list, poking a black hole with a stick. Vera, ever the peacekeeper, waved her multitude of hands in a display of calming futility. Let's not jump to conclusions, Zorvak. We all know Cadden isn't capable of such foresight. Gee, thanks, Vera, Cadden muttered, though he couldn't entirely disagree. Shaw intervened, her authoritative tone cutting through the noise like a laser scalpel. Let's focus on the facts. We activated the device and now we have a problem. We either solve it together or we keep arguing until we all run out of air. Or patience, Rix added, fiddling with his scanner like it was an old radio with a grudge. The counselors, a motley assortment of angular features and vibrant hues, exchanged skeptical glances. Trust was as scarce as a virgin asteroid in their galaxy, particularly where humans were concerned. After all, humanity had a reputation for being a bit too curious for its own good, like a child who couldn't resist sticking a fork in an electrical outlet. Zorvak's eyes narrowed, his skepticism untouched by Shaw's reasoning. Why should we believe that humans won't exploit this device for their own gain? Cadden sighed, resisting the urge to roll his eyes so hard they might get stuck. Because we're just trying to figure out how not to accidentally implode the universe, thank you very much. The chamber buzzed with murmurs, each whisper carrying a mix of doubt and disdain. Cadden could practically feel the weight of their collective gaze, judgmental, suspicious, and condescending. It was like being on trial, except his only crime was not knowing when to keep his hands to himself. If I wanted power, I'd have stayed back on Earth and run for president, Cadden joked, though the humor fell flat in the heavy atmosphere. Rix leaned over, whispering with a smirk, "You never had the hair for it." Shaw, ever the diplomat, attempted to steer the conversation back on track. "We have a unique opportunity to study this technology. Let's not squander it with infighting." Zorvak crossed his molten arms, a gesture that suggested he was about as impressed as a supernova in a snowstorm. "And if you humans decide to take what isn't yours, we're not thieves," Cadden shot back. "Annoyingly persistent, maybe, but not thieves." Vera seized the chance to diffuse the tension, her tone conciliatory. "Perhaps we should focus on sharing our findings. Knowledge is, after all, a resource that grows when divided." "Like bacteria," Cadden muttered under his breath, but the council's attention was already shifting. The counselors reluctantly nodded, though their expressions screamed distrust. It was a temporary truce, like a ceasefire between two warring factions who both needed to reload. With a silent agreement reached, the team returned to the device, their footsteps echoing in the vast chamber. The holographic images continued to flicker, each new vision a reminder of just how precarious their situation was. Cadden couldn't shake the feeling that they were all actors in a cosmic farce, each scene more absurd than the last. "Any idea what any of this means?" Rix asked, scanning the glyphs with a look of concentration that suggested he might understand them if he squinted hard enough. "About as much as a cat understands quantum mechanics," Cadden replied, staring at the swirling images. "For all we know, it could be the alien equivalent of a screensaver. Or a self-destruct button," Rix joked, though the thought did nothing to lighten the mood. As they worked, the counselors circled like vultures, each one eager to pluck any scraps of information they could. Trust was an alien concept, quite literally, and cooperation was a fragile thread that threatened to unravel at any moment. "Keep your eyes peeled," Shaw warned, her voice low. "We're walking a fine line here." Cadden nodded, though he wasn't sure what exactly he was supposed to be watching for. A knife in the back. The end of the universe. Shaw had a knack for understatement, like calling a supernova a minor inconvenience. Despite the tension, the team pressed on, each member focused on their task. Rix continued to analyze the device, his scanner a reliable companion in the face of uncertainty. Vera, her many hands more helpful than ever, cataloged their findings with a meticulousness that bordered on obsessive. Meanwhile, Cadden struggled to keep his mind from wandering to the worst-case scenarios. Paranoia was a survival skill in this line of work, and pessimism had a way of keeping people alive longer than optimism ever did. "Do you think they'll turn on us?" Rix asked, his voice barely audible over the hum of the device. "Probably," Cadden admitted, his gaze fixed on a particularly unsettling vision. "But if they do, at least we know where the exits are." Rix chuckled, though there was little humor in it. "Always a silver lining with you, huh?" As the hours dragged on, the counselors grew restless, their earlier semblance of cooperation disintegrating into thinly veiled hostility. Cadden could feel their stares, each one a reminder that humans were outsiders in this interstellar drama. "Keep your head down," Shaw advised, her tone a mix of caution and resignation. "We're outnumbered and they know it." "Story of my life," Cadden replied, though he couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the verge of something big, something that could change everything, for better or worse. The device continued to churn out visions, each one more perplexing than the last. It was like watching a slideshow of the universe's greatest hits, only with more explosions and existential dread. "Ever get the feeling we're playing with fire?" Rix asked, his gaze fixed on a vision of stars collapsing into oblivion. "More like juggling flaming chainsaws," Cadden replied, though he couldn't help but smile at the absurdity of it all. "But hey, at least it's never boring." As the council meeting dragged into its third, or was it fourth, hour, the tension reached a crescendo. It was a symphony of skepticism, suspicion, and self-interest, each note more discordant than the last. "You humans always think you know best," Zorvak accused, his voice a low rumble. "But this is bigger than your petty ambitions." "We're well aware," Shaw replied, her patience wearing thinner than a neutron star. "But maybe, just maybe, we can figure this out together." Zorvak's molten eyes narrowed, but he said nothing further. The silence that followed was heavy, a weight that threatened to crush any hope of resolution. In the face of mounting distrust, Cadden and his team pressed on, their determination unwavering. They were a motley crew, sure, but they were united by a common goal: survival. And maybe, just maybe, a shot at understanding the incomprehensible. "Think we'll ever get out of this alive?" Rix asked, his tone light despite the gravity of the situation. "Who knows?" Cadden replied, though he couldn't shake the feeling that they were teetering on the edge of something monumental. "But if we do, drinks are on me." "Deal," Rix said with a grin, though the odds were against them. As the counselors continued to bicker, their voices rising and falling like waves in a storm, Cadden felt a sense of camaraderie with his team. They were all in this together, for better or worse, and that was something no amount of suspicion could take away. In the end, it was Vera who broke the silence, her voice calm and measured. "Perhaps we should reconvene tomorrow." With fresher minds and, hopefully, clearer intentions, the counselors exchanged reluctant glances, each one weighing the risk of leaving against the promise of rest. Finally, they nodded in agreement, though the truce felt as fragile as a soap bubble in a supernova. "Take the night to think it over," Shaw advised, her gaze sweeping over the assembly. "We'll meet again in the morning." As the counselors dispersed, their arguments trailing off into the darkness like ghosts in the void, Cadden felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they'd find a way through the chaos, or maybe they'd just make a bigger mess. Either way, they'd face it together. "Think we'll ever understand any of this?" Rix asked as they packed up their equipment. "Probably not," Cadden admitted. "But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that sometimes you've just got to act like you do." With a final glance at the ruins, they made their way back to the surface, the stars above a reminder of the vastness of the universe and the smallness of their place within it. But for Cadden and his team, that was enough. They were human, after all, curious, stubborn, and irreverent to the end. And if the universe didn't like it, well, that was just too bad. The council chamber, now empty except for the echoes of earlier arguments, felt like the inside of a forgotten tomb. Cadden Voss sat on the edge of a stone bench, his fingers tapping an irregular rhythm against his knee. A symphony of unease played in his head. "So you think they'll actually listen to us tomorrow?" he asked, breaking the silence that clung to the room like a stubborn stain. Rix, still fiddling with his trusty scanner, glanced up with a smirk. "I dunno, maybe if we spoke in interpretive dance. They seem to like their theatrics around here." Cadden chuckled, though the humor was about as rich as recycled air. "I'd probably pull a muscle trying to mime 'Don't kill us all.'" They'd spent the last few hours hunched over the ancient device, trying to decipher its cryptic code. The ruins were like an intergalactic IKEA store, full of complex instructions and without a single Allen wrench in sight. But they'd managed to uncover something, an unusual energy signature that hummed like a hive of angry bees. If they were right, it could stabilize the multiverse energies threatening to tear everything apart. If they were wrong, well, the universe would implode and at least they'd go down with it. "Okay, so let's say, hypothetically, we convince the council," Rick said, leaning back and crossing his arms. "What happens then? Do we get medals? Or just kicked off the planet without so much as a thank you?" Cadden shrugged. "Either way, we're going to have to make them believe that humanity's individuality is the key to making this work. Yeah. Because nothing screams stability like a species that can't even agree on the best way to eat a pizza." "True, but think about it. Every other species here is all about the collective. One mind, one purpose, blah, blah, blah. We're a bunch of individuals, all with different ideas. That's what makes us adaptable, or just plain stubborn," Rix muttered. "Same difference." Shaw chose that moment to reappear, her expression as severe as ever. "We've got what we need," Cadden nodded. "We have something. Now we just have to convince a room full of beings who think we're about as trustworthy as a rabid squirrel." Shaw sighed, a weary sound that spoke volumes. "Then we emphasize the one thing we have that they don't. Our unpredictability. Our individuality. Hell, our ability to screw things up and somehow make them work anyway. Sounds foolproof," Rick said dryly. "Or just plain foolish." They packed up what few belongings they'd brought, the device nestled securely among a jumble of datapads and scanners. In the back of his mind, Cadden couldn't shake the image of the council's eyes watching them, each one a potential dagger aimed at their backs. Trust was as rare as a water oasis on this sand-blasted world, and twice as slippery. As they filed out, Vera fell in a step beside them, her multitude of hands gracefully managing to carry her share of the gear. "We did well today," she said, her voice soothing as an evening breeze. "We didn't die. I count that as a win," Cadden replied. Back out in the open air, the alien sky hung above them, a mess of stars and cosmic debris. It was beautiful in a way that made you want to laugh and cry at the same time, a constant reminder of how small and insignificant everything really was, but also how wondrous. "Think we'll ever see Earth again?" Rix asked, staring up at the swirling constellations. "Probably, if we don't inadvertently blow it up first," Cadden said with a half-smile. "But hey, wouldn't be the first time humans have had to clean up a mess. Let's hope it's not the last chance we get then," Shaw added, not quite joking. The walk to their quarters was quiet, each wrapped in thoughts as tangled as a ball of yarn in the hands of a particularly unruly cat. The simple adobe huts were a welcome sight, though they offered little in the way of comfort. But at least they had walls, which was more than you could say for some places they'd been. As Cadden settled into his bunk, he let out a long breath, tension seeping out of him like air from a punctured suit. "Tomorrow's going to be fun," he said to no one in particular. "Define fun," Rix answered from his own bunk. "Because I think our definitions are way off. Fun, as in trying to explain advanced alien technology to a room full of skeptics while they all argue about who gets to keep it. Ah, that kind of fun. Like a root canal but with more yelling." Cadden chuckled softly, despite the weight pressing on his chest. He closed his eyes, hoping that sleep would come quickly, and dreams wouldn't be filled with visions of collapsing stars. Morning, if you could call it that, on a planet where sandstorms were a regular feature of the meteorological landscape, dawned with a promise of chaos. The council chamber buzzed with anticipation, the atmosphere electric with the potential for conflict. Cadden felt it prickling at the back of his neck like an unwelcome itch. Shaw stood at the center, attempting to keep order, though it was a bit like trying to herd space cats. "We've reviewed the data," she announced, her voice carrying like a sharp knife through butter. "The ruins technology is designed to stabilize energies on a multiversal scale." Zorvac, looking as congenial as a thundercloud, leaned forward. "And you're certain of this? Or is this another one of your human gambles, more of an educated guess?" Cadden shot back with a grin that was more teeth than humor. "We're good at those." The counselors erupted in a cacophony of derision and doubt, their voices clashing like badly tuned instruments. It was, Cadden thought, a bit like a symphony composed by someone who hated music. Vera raised her voice above the tumult, her hands raised in a calming gesture. "We need to consider the possibilities. If this device can do what they say, it could prevent a catastrophic collapse, and if it doesn't?" Zorvac demanded, molten skin simmering with suspicion. "Then we're screwed anyway," Rix replied helpfully. "So, no pressure." Cadden resisted the urge to applaud his friend's tact or lack thereof. "Look, we're not saying we have all the answers, but we do have a direction. Humanity's individuality might be the key. Because naturally you assume humans are the saviors," one of the counselors sneered, something serpentine in its tone. "Well, we are good at cleaning up messes," Cadden said, pulling a grin that felt as precarious as the situation. The debate raged on, a whirlwind of accusations and counterarguments. Cadden glanced at Shaw, who looked like she was balancing a star on her shoulders. "How's it going?" he asked during a brief lull. "Oh, just another day convincing an interstellar council we're not complete idiots. I'd say mission accomplished, but I think that's a ways off." Shaw nodded, her eyes scanning the room. "We just need to get them to agree to a test. Prove that our unpredictability isn't a handicap." "Easier said than done," Rix muttered. "They've got more trust issues than an ex with a cheating heart." The session dragged on, an exercise in endurance as much as diplomacy. Shaw, Vera, and Cadden took turns fielding questions, each one designed to poke holes in their argument. It was like being pecked to death by 1,000 argumentative pigeons. Finally, as tempers began to fray and even the most patient counselor looked ready to throttle someone, Zorvac stood. His eyes met Cadden's, molten and inscrutable. "We will consider your proposal. But know this, if you fail, it will not just be your species that pays the price." Cadden nodded, trying not to let the weight of that threat crush him. "We're aware. And trust me, we're committed to making this work." With that, the council adjourned, leaving the chamber in a swirl of robes and tension. As the doors closed, Rix let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for hours. "Well, that went about as well as expected." "Yeah," Cadden agreed, rubbing the back of his neck. "But at least they didn't throw us out." Yet, Shaw added, her expression one of guarded optimism. "We've got a shot. We just need to make sure we don't waste it." Back in the confines of their quarters, the team regrouped, their plans spread out like blueprints for a heist. "We test tomorrow," Shaw said, her voice firm. "Make sure everything's ready." Cadden nodded, heart pounding with a mix of fear and anticipation. "You ever get the feeling we've bitten off more than we can chew?" "Every day," Rix replied. "But it's either that or let the universe implode, so we chew fast," Vera finished, her tone leaving no room for doubt. As they settled in for another restless night, Cadden allowed himself a moment of reflection. They were on the brink of something monumental or disastrous. Everything depended on their ability to harness the chaos within and around them. "Hey, Cadden," Rix's voice cut through the darkness. "Yeah, if we pull this off, I'm definitely holding you to that drink." Cadden chuckled, despite the knot in his stomach. "Deal. But only if we survive." The room fell silent save for the soft hum of alien tech and the distant winds howling outside. Cadden closed his eyes, letting the darkness take him, knowing that tomorrow would bring either salvation or ruin. In the end, it didn't really matter. They were human after all. And humans didn't know how to quit. The council chamber was a hive of activity, buzzing with tension that could slice through steel. Cadden stood at the center like a lamb before a particularly judgmental flock of wolves, clutching the device they'd gambled all their hopes on. He tried not to think about how many ways this could go wrong. Rick stood beside him, a comforting reminder that at least they'd screw this up together. "Ready to make history?" he asked, though his tone suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. "Or infamy," Cadden muttered back. "Either way, it'll be memorable." Shaw was already in position, her posture rigid with authority. "We've gone over this 100 times. We show them the device, explain how it works, and pray they don't decide to use us as target practice. Sounds easy," Rix quipped. "Like juggling flaming knives while blindfolded." "Oh, it'll be much worse than that," Vera said, joining them with her usual grace. "At least knives don't argue." Zorvak, the ever-skeptical alien, loomed nearby like a storm cloud about to burst. "You're truly convinced this will work?" he asked, skepticism pouring off him like a bad cologne. "No," Cadden replied, deadpan. "But it's either this or watch the universe break apart like a cheap toy. So we're kinda stuck with it." The counselors settled into their seats, a colorful array of species, each one more critical than the last. Trust was still an alien concept here, and Cadden had the sneaking suspicion it always would be. Shaw cleared her throat, her voice cutting through the chatter. "We've gathered here to demonstrate our proposal. This device can stabilize energies on a multiversal scale, using humanity's unique trait, our individuality." A ripple of doubt fluttered through the chamber. Cadden stepped forward, holding the device like it was a holy relic, though with less reverence and more desperation. "This might look like a fancy paperweight, but it's got potential. It taps into multiversal energies and harmonizes them using," he grimaced, knowing how this would sound, chaotic human thought. Laughter erupted, a chorus of disbelief. Cadden let them have their moment. "Yeah, laugh it up," he said. "But it's that unpredictability you all hate that might just save us." Zorvak raised a brow, whether curious or mocking was anyone's guess. "Prove it." Cadden nodded to Rix, who activated the device. Lights flickered on its surface, casting eerie shadows that danced across the chamber walls. It hummed with a life of its own, as if eager to prove itself. "Just think about something random," Rix instructed the counselors. "Something that doesn't make sense, like this mission's success." Vera suggested, earning a chuckle from Cadden. The counselors complied, albeit reluctantly. The device pulsed, its rhythm changing like a heartbeat fluctuating under stress. For a moment, Cadden feared it would implode, taking them all with it. But then, miraculously, it stabilized. A soft glow enveloped the room and the air grew thick with a palpable calm. It was working. The energies were harmonizing, the universe not collapsing, at least for now. Cadden allowed himself a small smile, turning to face the council. "See. Chaos in action. It's not pretty, but it works." The chamber fell silent, the counselors exchanging glances, some awed, others still skeptical. Zorvak folded his arms, his molten features betraying nothing. "Interesting. But sustainable. We can fine-tune it," Shaw interjected. "With time and cooperation, it can be perfected." A counselor with scales like polished obsidian leaned forward. "You expect us to join forces based on a single demonstration. We expect you to understand that sometimes chaos is a necessary ingredient for order," Cadden replied. "Something we humans have learned the hard way." Another grumble of discourse echoed, but it was softer, as if curiosity had begun to seep through the cracks of doubt. The council was considering it, which was more than they dared hope for. Cadden glanced at Shaw, a silent exchange passing between them. It wasn't a victory, but it was a start. And right now, a start was enough. "Well," Rick said, breaking the tension with a wry grin, "at least they haven't thrown tomatoes yet." "If only because they don't know what tomatoes are," Vera added with a smirk. Zorvak's eyes settled on Cadden, molten and inscrutable. "You have given us much to think about." Cadden nodded, grateful for even that grudging acknowledgement. "Thinking's a good start. Let's just not take too long, yeah. Time's kind of a luxury we don't have." The council began to disperse, discussions continuing in low tones. They'd sown the seeds of doubt, hope, and maybe, just maybe, cooperation. But the harvest was anyone's guess. As the chamber emptied, Shaw let out a slow breath. "I think we did it," she said, though uncertainty colored her words. Cadden shrugged, trying to mask his relief. "Or we just bought ourselves a little more time before they decide to turn us into space dust. Either way," Rick said, "we've done our part. Now we wait." Back in their quarters, the tension finally began to ebb away, leaving exhaustion in its wake. Cadden sank onto his bunk, the weight of the day pressing down on him like a collapsing star. "We're not out of the woods yet," Shaw reminded them, though her voice was softer, more hopeful. "Yeah," Cadden agreed, his eyelids heavy. "But for once it feels like we might actually find a way through." Rix chuckled, the sound weary but genuine. "That's the spirit. Let's just hope the universe agrees." As they settled in for another restless night, Cadden's mind drifted over the events of the day. They'd taken a step, one that could lead to salvation or ruin, but at least it was a step in the right direction. "Hey, Cadden." Rix's voice was a soft rumble in the darkness. "Yeah, if we survive this, remind me to retire somewhere without sand, or council meetings." Cadden smiled, the thought of peace a distant but comforting dream. "Deal. But only if we live to see it." And with that, he let the darkness take him, hoping that tomorrow would bring them closer to the salvation they desperately needed, or at least another chance to try. The next morning, amidst the aftermath of a restless night, they found themselves once again at the heart of the council chamber. It seemed the universe, in its infinite wisdom, had decided that one demonstration wasn't enough to convince everyone that they weren't insane. "Surprise, surprise. We've reviewed your presentation," began a counselor with feathers like a stormy sky, voice resonant with authority. "But questions remain." "Of course they do," Cadden whispered to Rix, who stifled a laugh. Shaw stepped forward, calm and composed. "We're ready to address any concerns you might have. We know it's a lot to take in." Zorvak's molten eyes fixed on them, scrutinizing their every move. "How can we be certain your device won't destabilize the energies instead?" "That's the beauty of it," Rix replied before Cadden could open his mouth. "It's designed to adapt, not dictate. Much like your favorite human here," he gestured at Cadden, earning a few chuckles. "Great," Cadden muttered. "I'm a fancy metaphor." Shaw shot them both a look that promised a reckoning later. "The device is a conduit for our chaos. It takes what should be random and finds a pattern. It's not foolproof, but it's a step in the right direction." The counselor with scales, still skeptical, clicked its tongue in thought. "You ask us to trust in the chaos of humanity." "It is unsettling. Welcome to our world," Vera said, multiple hands gesturing in what could only be described as a cosmic shrug. "There's risk involved, sure," Cadden acknowledged. "But there's also risk in doing nothing. We're not just asking you to trust us. We're asking you to trust that sometimes the best solutions come from the most unexpected places." The chamber fell silent, each counselor lost in their own thoughts. Doubt still lingered, but there was a spark of interest, an ember of possibility that hadn't been there before. "We will deliberate further," Zorvak said finally, his gaze lingering on Cadden. "But know this. Your actions have consequences beyond your comprehension." Cadden nodded, accepting the gravity of the situation. "We're aware, and we're ready to face them. Just maybe give us a head start if things go south." A few counselors chuckled, the tension easing just a fraction. As the meeting adjourned, Shaw turned to them, eyes sharp with determination. "We've made progress. Now we need to be ready for whatever comes next," which could be anything, Rix pointed out. "You know, with the universe hanging in the balance and all." "Exactly," Shaw replied, already moving toward the exit. "So let's make sure we're prepared." Back at their quarters, the air was thick with anticipation. They'd made a dent in the council's skepticism, but they weren't out of the woods yet. Cadden knew they'd have to stay sharp, constantly adapting to whatever curveballs were thrown their way. "Here's hoping tomorrow's chaos brings clarity," Cadden said, settling into his bunk. "Or at least fewer chances of imminent death," Rix added, tossing a data pad onto his own mattress. Optimism at its finest, Vera quipped, arranging her things with fluid, practiced ease. They fell into a companionable silence, each lost in their thoughts. It was a precarious peace, one that could shatter at any moment, but for now it would do. As Cadden drifted into sleep, his mind a whirl of possibilities and what-ifs, he couldn't help but cling to the hope that their gamble would pay off. Because if it didn't, chaos would be the least of their worries. And humans, if nothing else, thrived in chaos, for better or worse. Cadden Voss, staring at the aftermath of their latest council meeting, felt as if he were nursing a cosmic hangover. The kind that makes you question every life choice leading up to the moment you decided to speak in front of a room full of aliens who believed in their collective superiority more than they believed in gravity. "You look like you just lost a game of galactic chess," Rix observed, leaning against the wall, stretching his lanky frame in a way that made him look even more like a stick insect in a jumpsuit. Cadden could only grunt in reply. Words felt too much like hard work right now, that obvious just a bit. Rix flashed a grin, one part mischievous, 2 parts exhaustion. But hey, at least they didn't vote to fry us. Yet, silver linings, Vera glided in, graceful as ever, though the set of her mandibles suggested she was as worn out as the rest of them. "I think they're starting to get it," she said, crossing multiple arms over her chest. "Or at least they're pretending they do, which, given the usual speed of council progress, is practically warp speed." Cadden wiped a hand down his face, feeling the scratch of stubble he hadn't had time to deal with. He needed a shower, a drink, and 2 weeks' worth of sleep. They'd better. "I'd rather not spend the next decade watching them debate the merits of our existence." Shaw entered, a data pad tucked under her arm, looking like she'd just taken down a corporate takeover. "The council's agreed to reconvene in a few days," she announced. "They want to see the device in action again, but they're not dismissing it outright anymore." "Progress," Cadden said, with all the enthusiasm of a man learning he's got jury duty. "What about the human factor? They still think we're all about jazz hands and chaos," Shaw nodded. "Essentially. But they're starting to see the benefit of our unpredictability. Like it or not, chaos is our brand," Rick snorted. "And we're the best damn brand ambassadors chaos ever had." "Delightful," Vera said, tone dripping with irony. "I can't wait to see how they write that into their history books." "Humans, the universe's favorite catastrophe," Cadden chuckled, some of the tension easing from his shoulders. "Let's hope it's at least a bestseller." The mood in their cramped quarters was lighter than it had been in days. The council's skepticism was still there, like a stain that refused to come out no matter how hard you scrubbed, but it was fading. They had a chance. More than he dared hope for when this whole mess started. As they settled down for a meal, a concoction that tasted like cardboard but was marginally nutritious, Shaw brought them back to reality. "We can't get complacent. The council may be warming up to us, but we're far from a done deal." "Yeah," Cadden agreed, chasing a particularly stubborn piece of synth meat around his plate. "But I'll take warming up over frozen out any day." Rix leaned back, folding his arms behind his head. "So, assuming we don't get exiled to the Outer Rim for stepping on their toes, what's the plan?" "More demonstrations, more debates," Shaw said, ticking off fingers. "Basically, more of the same until they're convinced we're not just making this up as we go along." Cadden raised a brow. "Aren't we? The best plans always are," Rix interjected, winking. Vera shook her head, antennae twitching in amusement. "We'll just have to keep doing what we do best. Survive the chaos. The ultimate human pastime," Cadden said, raising his cup of whatever passes for coffee in this corner of the galaxy. "Here's to thriving in it." The mood shifted, laughter echoing off the steel walls. It wasn't much, but it was something. A reminder that even in the face of galactic uncertainty they had each other. And sometimes that was enough. When the council reconvened, Cadden was ready, or as ready as he ever got for these things. The council chamber buzzed with an undercurrent of wary anticipation, like a theater on opening night with the audience expecting either a masterpiece or a disaster. Rix fiddled with the scanner, the device humming softly as if eager to perform its party trick once more. "Let's hope it doesn't blow up this time," he muttered. "It's never blown up," Shaw corrected, though not without a hint of concern. "It's just been temperamental like my ex," Cadden quipped, earning a snort from Rix. As the counselors assembled, Cadden took his place at the podium. The usual suspects were present: Zorvac, inscrutable as ever, the feathered counselor whose name Cadden still hadn't managed to pronounce, and the scaly one who always looked like it was judging him for existing. "Thank you for reconvening," Shaw began, "all business. We're prepared to demonstrate the device once more and address any further concerns you might have." The feathered counselor tilted its head, eyes narrowing. "We have considered the implications of your proposal. The concept of embracing chaos is troubling." Cadden nodded. "I get it. It's not what you're used to, but it works. Sometimes the universe needs a little unpredictability to keep things interesting." Zorvac's molten eyes focused on him, a flicker of something like curiosity or gas passing over his features. "And you believe humanity is the key to this?" "Balance, we are," Cadden replied, voice steady. "We've spent centuries making sense of chaos, finding patterns where none should exist. It's what we do, even if it means risking the stability of the multiverse." The scaly counselor challenged. Cadden shrugged, trying for nonchalance. "Sometimes you have to shake things up to keep them from crumbling." "It's a gamble, sure, but one worth taking." The murmurs of debate rose, a discordant symphony of doubts and possibilities. Cadden watched, waiting, as the counselors weighed the merits of the human approach. It was a weird feeling, knowing the fate of the multiverse might hinge on their decision to embrace chaos as much as order. Rix leaned in, whispering, "Think they'll buy it, honestly?" Cadden replied, "I have no idea. But it's all we've got." The discussion dragged on, the counselors arguing over details, potential outcomes, and the sheer audacity of humanity thinking they could save the day with a device cobbled together from ancient tech and wild imagination. Finally, Zorvac spoke, his voice cutting through the cacophony like a laser. "We will proceed with caution, but proceed we will. Your device has potential, and your philosophy, though unsettling, holds merit." Cadden let out a breath he hadn't known he was holding. It wasn't a resounding victory, but it was something. A step forward. Shaw nodded, her relief carefully concealed behind a stoic mask. "Thank you. We'll continue to collaborate with your scientists to ensure the device operates as safely and effectively as possible." The counselors exchanged glances, some more grudging than others. The decision had been made, the path set. There'd be no turning back now. As they filed out of the chamber, Cadden felt a surge of conflicting emotions. Relief mingled with apprehension, hope with doubt. They'd come so far, yet the road ahead was still perilous. Back in their quarters, the weight of the day settled over them like a heavy cloak. Rix flopped onto his bunk with a sigh. "Well, we didn't get exiled. That's always a plus. Don't count your space chickens yet," Vera warned, though there was a glimmer of satisfaction in her eyes. "We've still got a lot to prove." "Yeah," Cadden said, sinking onto his own bed. "But at least we've got the chance to prove it." Shaw set aside her data pad, the tension of the day easing from her shoulders, "and the council's willing to listen." "That's more than we hoped for." They sat in silence for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts. The battle was far from over, but they'd made a dent in the council's skepticism, and for now, that was enough. Rix broke the silence with a grin. "So when this is all over, are we really retiring somewhere without sand?" Cadden chuckled, the sound a balm to his frayed nerves. "Hell, if we pull this off, we'll retire anywhere we damn well please." "Deal," Vera agreed, settling back with a contented sigh. As they drifted into sleep, the enormity of their task loomed over them, but it no longer felt insurmountable. They had a chance, and sometimes a chance was all you needed. For better or worse, chaos was their ally, and they'd learned to navigate its unpredictable tides. Cadden's last thought before sleep claimed him was of the universe they were trying to save, a universe where chaos and order danced a complicated waltz, and humanity had found its place in the rhythm. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't even close, but it was theirs. And that, he supposed, was enough.